Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live event on the Big Reset, which is the program we've been doing for about 3 months to try to make sense of the pandemic and the global public health challenges around the world. Let me give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to bring some people on the video to introduce you to. We basically, as most of you know, somewhere around January or February, the entire world changed. And all of the HR talent, workplace, economic growth strategies that companies had have been adjusted. And so those of us that do HR stuff found ourselves thrust into a new world. And it turned out we're now realizing that most of what we've been doing is leveraging things that we had been working on years in the past, but in a much, much faster way. And so as an education and research business, we decided to put together a program called the Big Reset Initiative, and we enlisted about 160 large corporations to help us, and they have been working with us now for the last 6 weeks on week-by-week sprints to talk about what they're doing in the pandemic, and I'm going to introduce the leaders of that in a minute. I also want to mention that this particular video is being sponsored by ServiceNow. Let me tell you a little bit about ServiceNow. As organizations navigate the new normal, the return to workplace for employees requires careful planning and execution. The ability to deliver employees the right digital experience, addressing both workplace and workforce readiness, is essential. With ServiceNow, employee workflows can keep employees informed, gather feedback, automate steps for return to work, and provide a safe, employee-ready working environment. Go to servicenow.com Safe Workplace to learn more about the new Safe Workplace application suite. ServiceNow is a very, very impressive company, so I recommend you do talk to them. So what we did in the last 5 or 6 weeks is, I run this business called the Josh Bersin Academy. I'm an industry analyst, and we realized the only way we were going to get our heads wrapped around this was to scale. And so we created 4 work streams. Initially, we're actually doing another phase of this starting in August with a 5th work stream, which I'll invite you to at the end. And each of the work streams focused on different topics. One focused on learning and culture, one focused on leadership or rather on culture and well-being, one focused on leadership and learning, one focused on workforce transformation, and the 4th focused on workplace transformation and back to work. And let me introduce our senior faculty in the Academy who joined us and led these initiatives. The first person I want to introduce is Nuno Gonzalez. Hey, Nuno, welcome. Nuno is a senior HR leader at the forefront of envisioning and driving transformation that is in the HR function. He is a pioneer in the move towards continuous transformation. He's the head of talent acquisition and development at UCB Pharma, which is one of the most successful pharmaceutical companies in the world. And he has also worked at Sanofi, and he is really known for his ability to anticipate the talent needs of the future and foster an environment to learn and grow every day for employees and patients. The second person I wanted to introduce you to is, we're going to have the next person, Nazneen Razi. I met Nazneen this year. We've had a wonderful time working together. Nazneen specializes in HR and talent strategies to drive business improvement. She was the Senior VP and CHRO for the Healthcare Service Corporation, the largest customer-owned healthcare provider in the United States. She was also the EVP and Chief Global HR Officer for JLL, a very large commercial real estate company. She has over 25 years of experience leading HR organizations at such firms as Comdisco and CNA Insurance. She's also a very good writer, I have to say. She and I have a lot of things in common. The third person I want to introduce is, I believe, Nancy Vitale.
Josh.
I met Nancy at Genentech when she was the CHRO at Genentech. She was responsible for leading the team that was dedicated to creating a great workplace for the 14,000 employees at Genentech. Her purpose is to make meaningful connections in her career. And prior to Genentech, she led HR for Gillette North America and at Procter & Gamble. And I'll let Nancy introduce herself and talk a little bit more about what she does when we get going. And the fourth person that was part of our Big Reset working group is Pete Sackling. Pete, I mispronounced your last name, I'm sure. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Great. Pete is somebody I actually know from the Deloitte days. Pete is a highly experienced business leader with deep expertise at the intersection of employee experience and workplace strategy. He led the physical and operational strategy for Deloitte University. If you've ever been to Deloitte University, it's one of the most magnificent workplace experience designs I've ever experienced in my life. And so in addition to that, he now does consulting in the future of work and workplace design, and he led the work group on Back to Work. So anyway, I wanted to just introduce these four people to you. And so what we're going to do now for a couple of minutes is, before we all get on the video together and talk, in fact, we're going to all get on the video together now, is we're going to start with a couple of questions, because what happened over the last 6 or 7 weeks is we probably interviewed 60 or 70 companies. And rather than tell you all of the things that each company did, I want each of the faculty members to give you their perspectives on the highlights and some of the stories they uncovered in their area. So let's start the questions, you guys, Michelle, and we'll open up the videos and get everybody online. I think we're going to do a little joint video thing. Great. So you guys all here?
We are.
All right. How's the volume and everything? Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining. First of all, I cannot thank you all enough for everything you've done over the last month and a half. I know it's been a labor of love, but we are learning a lot, and we will be producing a research report on this. But let me start with maybe one of the biggest topics for you, Nazneen, organizational culture. Prior to the pandemic, we were in a very low unemployment rate cycle. We were in the 10th or 11th years of stock market and GDP growth. Everybody was worried about the future of work and AI. Bam, all that changed. So I have two questions for you. One is, tell us about what you've learned about culture and what are the big things that we can take forward in culture. Second question, Michelle, if you just throw it up there, is what is the impact of this on the work transformation and the workforce transformation in the companies that you interviewed? So give us your insights on what we've learned about in the last couple of months.
Thank you, Josh. And first of all, before I respond to your question, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for giving me the opportunity to lead the breakout session on workforce transformation. I really enjoyed to work with an incredible team of global HR leaders from across 4 continents. We learned a lot. We talked about common issues, and I'm going to give this group some stories that came out of those discussions and some of the solutions that we were able to curate. So first of all, hello, everyone. Going back to your question on culture, what I saw as we discussed the changes that were taking place, the biggest cultural shift was the speed of transformation. I found that the transformation was not just the transformation of organizations, but the workplace, the workforce. And we know, Josh, you and I know that from experience, it takes years for companies to transform their culture. And with this pandemic, that moved into high gear. Companies may have been slow to change. They did not trust their employees, or they were relying on hierarchical and traditional organizational models, and they adapted very, very quickly. They evolved at unprecedented speeds. So let me give you some stories. Companies across the globe are redesigning their operations to be much more nimble, much more lean, much more resilient, and clearly durable. So what were some of the examples? I know you like those.
Yeah.
Anheuser-Busch, I can talk about them. They said that this pandemic triggered massive process changes. So they took their performance management system and they completely revamped it within a week. And they said a process like that would have typically taken 20 years to accomplish. And this improved their agility, their decision making. And so they were able to make it much more futuristic. They went from a 6-month cycle to a 6-week cycle. So that's an example. Another example, I think for those who joined in the last WebEx, you heard how Sainsbury, which is a UK supermarket, they doubled their online and had to quickly accelerate their digital capabilities, transform their culture. And then the one that I liked as well is Continuum Global Solutions. Elaine, who's their CHRO, was in my group, and she said they have a customer contact center. And what she said was when they had to transform and they saw the surge in their business, they had to quickly revert to or quickly move to a very online digital onboarding and training process. But what was interesting is that the training and the onboarding actually resulted in higher levels of engagement. It took less time for people to get onboarded, and their retention improved. So there were some really great benefits of the changes that we're making, which goes to, organizational resilience. All of these folks were trying to.
Let me ask you one follow-up question
Yeah.
on this. So, I was involved in some of these conversations too. So these companies did things very, very quickly, and somehow they felt liberated from the constraints of bureaucracy and decision-making, decision rights, and all that stuff. Did everybody feel good about that? I mean, did they feel nervous about it? Were they afraid of it? Because the other thing that I've seen in the data is employee engagement is skyrocketing. Employees are so excited about work. And I think one of the reasons they're excited is they're seeing the employers do more things for them. But did you get a sense that this has all been positive, or did people freak out about how fast they had to do everything?
From what I could tell, the stories that emanated, I will tell you that most of the HR people felt very, very much in the center of the change, and they loved it. I mean, I understand that the issues they had to grapple with, the well-being issues and some of the concerns, I get that, but the transformation and the work that they were doing was groundbreaking. I mean, it was really for the first time that the entire world was pivoting to a whole different structure. The infrastructure was changing. I mean, there were stories, GE, companies like GE and Bank of America, they were of the belief that things couldn't be done remotely. There were jobs that had to be done in the office, very office-centric cultures. And completely overnight, B of A, 80%, over 100,000 employees went completely remote, and they had to build the infrastructure. And so they loved it. I think, it was an excitement.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about with the group at the end, I want to throw out a funny question, which is change management dead? Do we no longer need the discipline of change management?
Interesting question. Very interesting.
We'll save that. Okay, save that, you guys. All right. Now I want to introduce Nancy. Nancy knows a lot about well-being coming from the pharmaceutical and a company that's focused on well-being, and then actually now working as an analyst and doing consulting in this. Obviously, well-being is now a huge part of work and the whole life experience that we're dealing with. Tell us what you learned about that and some of the things that companies are doing to rethink the whole idea of individual and organizational well-being.
Sounds good, Josh. Before I jump into that, just to build on what Nazneen was saying, and that is this notion of agility, which we've seen across the board. I think one of the insights that came out of our group as it relates to just the speed of transformation is that leaders individually and collectively are not spending enough time reflecting on the why. And what this whole experience has opened up for them is a world of possibility that they never thought they could do in terms of speed of decision making and being able to pivot. I'm sure Nuno might have something to say about this, but I think that was one of the things that came out of our breakout discussion is the opportunity for midterm kind of post-mortems in terms of how to take those learnings and actually build them into the DNA of culture so that we don't lose this post kind of COVID. So we can come back to that at the end if there's interest. But yeah, I mean, I left Genentech a year ago to really focus on launching my boutique firm, which is dedicated to helping organizations integrate well-being into company culture. And in our breakout group, we touched upon a few themes, but one of them really surfaced to the top. And I think in this whole work from home, dealing with social isolation, dealing with physical distancing, loneliness really came up as one of the topics, needing to be addressed. And what we saw from the organizations in our breakout group, which spanned multiple industries, many different large organizations, was how organizations were responding to really widening and broadening the connections of their employees, particularly with the blurring of lines between people's kind of personal personas and their professional personas, and really an invitation to engage whole households and family members in the connection to organization culture. We saw Banco Santander, who implemented a virtual music making event where they invited, all of their family members of their employees to create music together. Caretaking responsibilities were another major stress as it pertains to well-being. And so we saw Chubb Insurance, who really coordinated a significant effort to engage family and friends in the caretaking responsibilities of the working parents' children. And we saw Kern's Health Systems, who really implemented a drive-in movie night in their parking lot, where they invited all of their employees and their families to join them in kind of a movie experience together. But, these are just a few of many examples that really show the connection of experience. And I think post-COVID, the opportunity is, how do we maintain this moving forward? As it relates to the resilience question, in the midst of our sprint, what we found is that people were all suffering from meeting fatigue and, Zoom fatigue or whatever platform they were using. And I think, probably less creative and innovative as a solution. It doesn't have to be sexy or creative to be effective. What we found organizations doing is trying to be much more intentional and deliberate about how they were engaging people in their meetings. So if it didn't have to be a group meeting, if it was a one-on-one check-in or whatnot, we found people instituting more walking one-on-ones, getting out, which enhanced their movement and physical well-being, but they were able to still connect. Another example of this is where some companies were instituting no meeting times, kind of the sacrosanct of, lunchtime or blocks of time, to be more intentional, to give people opportunities to attend to their children at home in their caretaking responsibilities, or perhaps go get a workout in, or whatever it might be. But it doesn't have to be sexy or innovative to be effective. And that's where we saw people really getting scrappy to focus on what was going to work for them.
What do you think? One more question on this topic. As do I, that the tech industry thinks they're going to solve well-being with apps and watches and videos and all that stuff. Did you find that to be a big part of this, or maybe not? How well did all the health tech help, or is it helping?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, and you and I are about to take a deep dive on the well-being market and look at the well-being solutions that are out there and all the vendors. I think they have a definite role to play, and digital adoption to support well-being is certainly an enhancer, but it's not an absolute requirement. And that gets to one of the other themes that came up in our group, which is around scrappiness, because many of these HR pros were experiencing a tightening of their budgets, and they had to get really creative. And sometimes that meant really downsizing or right-sizing some of their technology solutions, but really going to what was going to work in a low-tech analog environment. If it was effective, let's do it. It doesn't have to necessarily be digital all the time, 100% of the time.
Great. Okay, so we've talked about the culture of change, and what somebody made a comment I noticed on the questions, that, and it was an HR person, I think. She said, change management is all I do anymore, which is kind of what this has been all about. And this issue of well-being, let me point out one thing on this idea of connections. And I've mentioned this in some webinars. If you look at happiness research from the World Happiness Institute, which is a gigantic database of how people rate their happiness in life. And they look at the 4 factors of happiness being financial health, physical health, relationships and a sense of trust. Relationships are far more correlated to happiness than money, physical health, or anything else. So this idea of building relationships at work and walking around virtually is really fascinating. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, I don't know for most of you, but in my case, I go for a walk in the evenings when I'm done working, and all of a sudden all my neighbors are out walking around. Now we are wearing masks, but we're all sort of smiling at each other or waving. So I feel like maybe that's a little bit of a lesson we can learn about work, is get out of our little silos and get to know each other a little better, and everything feels a little healthier. Okay, third question is for Nuno. And Nuno had a very big topic, leadership and learning. Leadership is turning out to be one of the biggest messages and stories in the whole pandemic, and that'll be a big part of the research report. Nuno, tell us what you learned about leadership and what's been happening with leadership, and what are some recommendations and stories that you could share about leadership and learning.
Thank you, Josh. I think it's first and foremost, I think the 5 weeks went really fast, and the most interesting thing is that right in the middle of the 5 weeks, we actually have we had a critical event in the U.S. with the Black Lives Matter in the U.S. that I think it even ignited even more everything that we were saying about the impact of COVID, and then eventually everything that was related to George Floyd and all the events that followed all of that. So I think one of the things that we've learned is that all of our 4 breakouts are very interconnected. And I was hearing Nancy talking about well-being and caretaking and driving, parking, movie nights, and all that. One of I believe has been one of the topics that has been in the 4 breakouts has been this kind of humanity. And if you get to think about it, this is a sociological crisis, right? It's not necessarily an economic crisis that then impacts society. It's actually the other way around, right? Which is very interesting. So if you see that, what you see is that then people from one day to the other, their social contracts, the way that they interact, kind of change dramatically. And what they, in terms of learning and leadership development, the impact right now is that they need to understand how to behave. What is this? What is this new norm? How should I behave with my teams, with my colleagues, and what should I do? Right? What we've seen in terms of leadership skills, for example, was that it's not necessarily about new leadership skills. It's not the big reset for leadership. It's a rebalance. We've always in the industry, we've always worked around the technical skills and the power skills, as you brand them, Josh, and how whether AI skills and the development of software computing is one of the critical skills for the future. And all of a sudden, it's probably not the most critical one. And it starts to become, empathy and resilience and trust and dealing with ambiguity and vulnerability and active listening. Mm-hmm. Everything that we've heard from the companies is that there's a bigger appetite and a bigger demand to develop these power skills than ever before. People say, and we are in the industry, and we know that sometimes get people to talk about themselves is not necessarily easy. Right now, and we saw that from one of the companies saying, a chief HR officer saying, for the first time we had a town hall with 2,000 people, and we were talking about how do you feel, right? That never happened before. We have Gucci saying, we are putting empathy in everything that we do. We have Ford, for example, talking design thinking right now is at the center of the way that we do learning and leadership development, because one way or the other, if it's already difficult to develop empathy in adults or young adults face to face, it's exponentially more complicated to do it actually at a distance. The interesting thing as well, Josh, is that apparently people are, because of all this, much more willing to help. And this connects again to the well-being, much more willing to help and much more willing actually to ask for help as well. We had a lot of good examples of these cases where group mentoring, peer mentoring, peer coaching seems to be very much in the norm of the development of these new leadership skills, the way that we see it. The other piece, and we talked about speed, and we were talking about go-to-market, right? How fast do you go to market with your learning and development, right? Probably 6 months ago, 12 months ago, we were complaining because we only had 2 months to do it, right? Right now, our speed to go to market, and we had Target as well telling us, listen, we needed to react so fast that we had a go to market of 5 to 7 days, right? Again, it's a new paradigm that we're experiencing. When we talk about leadership, though, I think a caveat here, we believe that it's changing, right? Now, what will be the world after COVID, and what we have, right after this pandemic, we don't know. But right now, what we're seeing is a rebalance between the technical and the behavioral or the power skills, with the power skills being much more in demand than the technical ones.
Thank you. That one of the things that Nuno and we all talked about during some of the readouts was this shift from the culture of personality to the culture of, I think you called it, of what did you call it?
Character.
Culture of character. And this morning I saw that the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump's taxes are going to be made public. And it did remind me of this, maybe character is the word that describes what is going on in leadership right now, is we're moving more towards the culture of character. So I'd like to explore that when we get into the open Q&A in a minute. But let me turn it over to Pete. Pete had probably the hardest job, because right in the middle of this, we started this whole process, and then the Trump administration and a bunch of other people said, back to work, go. So everybody started rushing back to work. And, in some countries they were already there, in a lot of countries they weren't. And so Pete's been trying to figure out what has been going on there. We have some wonderful stories there. So Pete, tell us what you've learned about that so far. Share as much as you can, because I'm sure everybody wants to learn about that.
I appreciate that, Josh. Yes, it's been an interesting journey, and thanks for all that. And honestly, the points made by our colleagues here today on the elements that they've been exploring all tie into this element. This element is really a hardscape tactical thing, but it so impacts end-to-end talent experience, well-being, culture, engagement, etc. So just understanding that as our starting point, here's what we pull together as a breakout. So relative to anything else that has ever happened in the workplace strategy, design, or operation world, things right now are happening at light speed, right? Nuno said Target had a 5 to 7 day implementation process, had to happen. Changes in owned or leased space just simply take more time. Space is costly, typically the number 2 spend in most organizations, and the commitments are rather long, 10 to 20 years. So thinking about space from that perspective puts up barriers. The challenge really is how to blow past those barriers. So our group focused on elements around, for instance, the shift from the focus on being in the office to work anywhere model. My research tells me that we were about 25% of employees pre-COVID that were enabled to work remotely. Now that's, I think McKinsey reported at like 62% overnight, right? What might have taken 5 to 7 years now took 5 weeks. So that shift created some crisis management that's necessary, but also in the groups I talk to, they're trying to make sure that they don't break anything that long-term needs to be adjusted from a strategic perspective. So I'll give you some examples. And I'm focusing more on the corporate side of the space, because we had industries varying from manufacturing to retail to food service to professional services. All of them have that commonality of corporate space, so we focused on those areas to start with. We might dive deeper in the next phases otherwise. But number one, it was safety, safety, safety. There are some of our group that just have decided to not reopen their offices at all, or a very minimal way, until the end of the year, or at least the fall. They're keeping checks on that. They have leadership team meetings weekly, and more frequently than that, often led by sharp professionals because this is, if nothing else, a people-driven crisis, right? So that safety issue is primary and focused, and issues around density and rethinking operations and how to keep it safe throughout the day once you have people there. Density used to be the measure that real estate organization used to figure out how to shed space. Now it's, do we have enough space to keep people at 6-foot distances from each other while they're working together? Very big challenge. So one firm, for instance, brought on a concierge type staff, small staff, to enable inter-office delivery. So everything from food service to supplies to operational services. They closed all the common spaces. They closed the kitchen areas. They closed the copy areas. Those would be major points of viral transfer. So they thought differently and thought, well, let's bring the services to where they are in the space and keep that foot traffic down. Other examples were they also, in those circumstances, had daily attestations that individuals had to make before they came to the office on an app, answering questions, et cetera. And then when they got there, they were provided with a welcome kit that had, disinfectants in it, PPE, water, information sheets. It had one cool item as well, this cool little door hook thing where you could use it to open doors and in both directions without having to touch the door. I wish I had invented that before this all started. I wouldn't be doing this. And so as for space reconfiguration or redesign in the short term in particular, the steps have varied based on their steps forward. One organization has closed all their conference rooms except for their boardroom because it didn't allow social distancing as a challenge. If you think about and one of the other organizations that we talked to actually converted some of their open spaces into sort of an open meeting area to create that ability to have 10 people or so but still remain distant. You just mentioned Trump in the White House, Josh. If you ever watch their now cabinet meetings, they've shifted all their meetings to the hall where they have state dinners, which is the only hall big enough to have tables set up so that all the cabinet members can stay 6 feet apart. So everyone is trying to adapt to that circumstance and situation. One of the other key things is, where do we have our people go? So lots of places have headquarter space in central business districts that require public transportation or very expensive parking. Now, one of them at least has set up more of a hub space, a hub and a spoke perspective, where the spokes are temporary spaces where people can go and collaborate close to where they live so they can drive in both directions and keep safe. So logistics all the way back to their home to the office are some things that these organizations are having to figure out. So it's really right now about safety and confidence, creating one and instilling the other so that people feel, as has been mentioned in the other discussions, cared for, empathized with, and accommodated in what they have to do day to day.
Thank you, Pete. This is such a big topic. I wish we had more time. We've got about 7 or 8 more minutes. Let me say a couple things and I want to open it back up. First of all, for all of you watching, we are going to produce a research report on everything we discovered that'll be out later in July, number one. Number two, there's a new sprint of sessions starting the first week of August. If any of you watching would like to join, we can't have all of you join, but we're certainly willing to participate, have you as many as possible. Send us an email or go to the Bersin Academy website. But before I run out of time, let me ask you guys one. We have a lot of questions we aren't going to have time for, but I do have one. I want to throw it out to each of you. Given that this pandemic is not going to end soon, it's probably going to go on for a year. Let's assume it goes on for a year. What do you think we're going to look like 6 months from now? Is it going to be more the same? Where is this taking us as an HR profession? Because one of the things I know is an issue now is exhaustion. People are tired. They've been working as hard as they can for 3 or 4 months, and they would like to take a break, even though they don't have anywhere to go. But anyway, give me your perspectives on that. And because we're going to run out of time, we've got about 6 minutes to talk about what do you think is going to be the most important thing for the next 6 or 9 months. Anybody wants to chime in?
Well, I'll start. Yeah, Josh, I would say that while the area we focused on, space, is certainly an issue in terms of production and things that have to happen in those spaces. I think the remote or work anywhere model is not just here to stay, but needs to be quickly picked apart from an experience perspective. Things that we used to rely on physical interactions to do that we don't have to do anymore, at least for the next year. We have to come up with new and interesting ways to create that engagement, to create that sense of culture where it might have been physical otherwise. So I think there's a lot of work to do from that point of view.
So there's a lot of work on remote work, culture, and rules and norms. Okay. Who wants to go next? I'll let you get around.
I think one of the things that I would hope as an HR professional is some of the things that were positive, I hope will stay. Because, we've started to work in a much faster fashion, and it happened organically. It didn't have to be tested. We busted some of the myths. We created new horizons. And I think if we stayed with those, we will be achieving the better normal, whatever that looks like. So there are certain things that we're going to have to stop doing because they were more Band-Aids. But I think those that endure past the pandemic should be the ones that will create a much brighter future. And I can think of some examples clearly. There was a company in Asia, financial services. It's an asset management company, and they have a lot of security around their data. So when they moved to working from home, they built a humongous set of infrastructure. And now they're debating, they've professed that going into the new world, at least 30% of their people will continue working in a different environment. So I think those are the kinds of things that should sustain over a period of time. And we have to be intentional on what that is if we want to create a good future.
Great.
Josh, I think for me specifically, I think there's, if I look 6 months ahead, if we have another wave of COVID, if we have people tired and all that, I think we're going to have a different war for talent. And the reason why I tell you this is that I think those that will, we will look and we will know how people are treated, how our colleagues are treated, or our neighbors or our cousins or our spouses are treated in other companies, right? I believe that the companies that will treat well and that will be the most human companies will be kind of attracting much more the talent than all the other companies that will only continue to be focusing on performance and P&L results. Those companies that will neglect the human aspect will lose talent.
Okay, I really hope you're right. What do you think?
Can I just add, I'll take one slice of this, and we've talked about this notion of an expansion and contraction, and these waves of expansion and contraction that we'll probably continue to see during that year that you just described, Josh. But one slice of this, I think, is around the caretaking responsibilities of working parents in particular, which is a large percent of the population for many of these organizations. And we saw Twitter come out this week with providing, summer camp and opportunities to care for Twitter employees' kids, full time. We also saw a story, I can't remember the company, where a woman got fired because her kid was in the background, and there was this notion of distraction and detraction. You can't be solely focused. So to Nuno's point, how do we support the variety and diversity of needs of the employees from a caretaking responsibility, particularly when schools are in jeopardy of opening in the fall? And so that's going to be another topic that I think companies are going to have to wrestle with. We just kind of skidded by, at the end of the school year, but that's going to be front and center for many.
Okay, guys, I'll give you my perspectives because we're close to sort of out of time. I think what's going to happen is all of these wonderful things we've experienced, including employee engagement, are going to continue. But all of a sudden, companies are going to look at their P&L and their stock price and their bottom line again. They're going to say, now what? And so I think the biggest lesson that we're all going to learn in the next 6 months is this problem of uncertainty is not going away. This idea that we're going to go back to something normal, I don't think we are. I think we're going to have to get comfortable with working in a company that is changing very rapidly all the time. And in that vein, we are starting a new theme, a new stream of questions and teams starting in August. I think we're out of time right now. We only had 40 minutes, I think, booked for this, as I remember correctly. Is that right, you guys? 40? 45. Okay, 5 more minutes. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's the first question. What else, you guys, let me just open it up since we have 5 more minutes, I'm sorry. What else do you want to share that you thought were like just unbelievably interesting stories that you think people could learn from that came from some of these clients, some of these companies? Anybody want to think of?
Josh, one of the things I heard repeatedly was the sort of middle management challenge that's going on right now, where they were typically, in somewhat virtual mode in terms of managing remotely, but now are really 100% that way and dealing with their own stresses at home, that swath of supervisor and leader is really suffering the most from both perspectives, and some focus on how to train them up and get them better prepared for that circumstance is a high focus.
Well, one company I do know, a telecommunications company, said what they did to deal with that is they have a weekly open meeting for all managers to just talk about things they're dealing with as a group every week for 2 hours, which is one way to deal with that management issue. So I think that's a great innovation.
Yeah, one other thing I might highlight, Josh, is going back to this notion of scrappiness. And what we found is many of these companies who are pulsing employees more frequently, diving deep and doubling down on their employee listening strategy, but then taking action quickly after that. Companies like Atlassian and Kern Health Systems that were putting out what I'd call imperfectly perfect solutions. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect anymore. It just has to address the need. And I think we're going to continue to see more of that. But as HR teams embrace this notion of scrappiness, it brings out creativity. But if you're going to ask the employees, you have to quickly respond, and it doesn't have to be a perfect solution.
Yeah, that may be one of the most permanent changes that comes out of this is the informality of work now. You don't have to get dressed up. You don't have to go to the office. You can have your dog in the back and people don't get upset. That may be
right.
For a long time. I mean, that's a really good point. I just thought of that. Did you have something or?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, Josh. I think there was an example of, I think you wrote about it this week. I think it's about a company that is very dear to my heart. I had the pleasure to be the first chief learning officer of Sanofi, and Sanofi is a company that I know well and I like very much. And the current chief learning officer, a friend of ours, she said, listen, what we were able to accelerate, what we were able to do in this 6 months is by no means comparable to what we could have done 2 years ago or even 12 months ago. When you see that 900,000, if I remember correctly, 900,000 hours of learning in 3 or 4 months for a company of 114,000 employees is just massive. I think for us as an HR and learning and leadership development professionals, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for us to create value, which is something that we've been wanting since ever, right? Now the question is, can we create it? Can we deliver on the expectations? Can we be as fast as even if it's scrappy, right, Nancy? But can we be as fast to respond to the needs? Can we be concurrent to the business? We cannot have any more like 6 months of design and thinking and then eventually delivering something.
Well,
I think it's just
do you guys think, Nazneen, let me ask you this, and because it sort of gets along to the same question of a lot of the topics. One of the things that slows companies down is hierarchy. I can't do this until so-and-so approves, and he can't do it until she approves, and he's not available till next week, and that meeting can't be scheduled because they're not available till the following week, and on and on and on and on. Didn't we just obliterate all that?
I think we kind of did. The dismantling of hierarchy was one of the best things that happened to some extent. We spent 2 of the 5 sessions talking about exactly that. What are the skills and the capabilities of the future? And, what does that look like? And to Nuno's points, these are not very different, but they are accentuated in certain places. Embracing new realities, busting all the old kind of thinking, right? Going through a whole different motion. Those things came out loud and clear. Agility, uncertainty, dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity. Leadership, the leadership constructs of the old days don't work in the new environment. We need a new form of leadership, which includes empathy, includes amping up.
Also, the other thing that I would add is I think we've learned that you can trust people.
Yes.
You can tell people that we need to do this. You can put people together and they'll do it. And they'll do a great job. And you don't have to micromanage and inspect and review and on and on and on, because a lot of these things just happen so fast. There was no time for that. You guys, I think we are now out of time. So I just want to take a minute and thank you each for everything you've done, for your continuing support of this whole initiative, working with us. It's been a joy to work with you. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys all learned a lot from it. For those of you watching the video, we are starting the next wave of this in August. There will be a research report. Reach out to any one of these people. All 4 of them are either in business independently or doing consulting, or more than willing to talk to you. And thank you guys all for coming. I think this is the end of our video for today, and we'll do this again soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everybody.
Josh.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.